Data compiled by a New Jersey government agency found alleged white supremacists were responsible for all of the race-based domestic terrorism incidents the office tracked in 2018. The New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness released the data after tracking 32 domestic terrorism incidents in 2018.
Of the 46 people allegedly involved in those incidents, 25 were classified by the agency as race-based extremists. All were suspected white supremacists. Hunter Walker is the White House correspondent for Yahoo News. He's been writing about this, and he joins us now from Washington. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, Hunter, we are just on the two-year anniversary of that march in Charlottesville where Heather Heyer was killed. White supremacists, Nazis, neo-Nazis were marching. You've been doing deep dives into this. What is the most striking fact that you've discovered in looking over this report? Are we looking, it's not a growing threat, it is a threat.
Well, I think the most striking fact is that this report has not been given to Congress. We spoke to Cory Booker and the office of Senator Dick Durbin. Both of them are on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they have been pushing for this exact data since about April or May. And it was there. It was there in this DHS office in New Jersey. It wasn't even classified. We obtained this from a law enforcement source, but they had actually put it on their website in sort of an obscure section. So, you know, it's very odd to me that, as you were saying, this problem is clearly a very large one. They are tracking it, and yet as Congress is asking questions about how they're doing so and asking for this information, it's not being provided. An aide to Senator Durbin said the government has either been, quote unquote, unable or unwilling to give these figures to them.
Hunter, is there a common profile when it comes to potential perpetrators?
Well, you know, basically what we've learned is that in about April, the DOJ admitted that they went from 11 categories of how they track domestic terror incidents to just 4. These 11 categories included white supremacists. So, you know, now they're actually making the profile more vague, and they're saying race-based extremists. And part of this is that they were profiling so-called black identity extremists. But this is something that, as this data shows, there was no incident of last year on the domestic terror front. And also, experts say groups like that don't exist. So, you know, right now for domestic terrorism, a huge majority of the profile seems to be someone with white supremacist or neo-Nazi views. There were some other groups on this report, including what they call anti-government extremists, and then also, quote unquote, single-issue extremists, which in this report included one, you know, pro-life activist, an anti-abortion activist, and then anarchists. So, you know, those seem to be the broad categories, but I think the question that these members of Congress have is, why have we broadened the categories? Why are we talking about this in a less specific way?
So, Hunter, as you know, FBI Director Christopher Wray has testified before Congress multiple times. He's talked about the white supremacist threat. He's talked about the domestic terrorism threat that this country is facing. He mentioned that there were some 90 arrests made of domestic terror threats in this country. What's really fascinating is he hasn't shared information about those arrests, not only with members of the press, but he's not even sharing it. The FBI is not even sharing it with members of Congress. Why is that?
It's really not clear. And again, that's what I think is one of the most striking things here. I mean, Christopher Wray told Senator Booker in one of his hearings that the FBI has stopped using the term, quote unquote, black identity extremists. He didn't really answer why, and he didn't really say when. And he's ignored follow-up questions from this committee, which has oversight over the DOJ, about, you know, all of their practices around this, including when they moved from 11 categories of domestic terrorism down to 4. Again, this exact data that we found about, you know, how many domestic terrorist incidents occurred with white supremacists. You know, they've been asking for all of this stuff and just not getting it from the DOJ. So I don't have an answer to that. They didn't really respond to any requests for comment from us about why they seem to have withheld this information from Congress. And it really is one of the biggest questions I have right now.
And so also the DOJ has failed to provide this to the Senate despite requests, as you mentioned. How does this report play into concerns over how the Trump administration has dealt with domestic terrorism?
Well, you know, this report shows thwarted plots. It shows incidents of weapons stockpiling and threats that were all, you know, investigated and prosecuted by the DOJ, right? So the accusation or question here would not be that the government is ignoring this issue or not dealing with these domestic terrorists. It's really all about the public dissemination of information or lack thereof. And the whole question is the government trying to obscure the size of the white supremacist problem by, calling these people race-based and not answering questions from Congress about, how many white supremacists are involved in domestic terrorism. And again, this quote-unquote race-based category does not include anything that's not a white supremacist attack or plot. So, there's a real question about why that needs to be used. So that's one issue that people have with the classification. But we also just saw a CNN report this morning describing hate crimes reporting. And, as Vlad noted, it's the second anniversary of Heather Heyer's death in Charlottesville. And one of the examples in this report is her death, which was not classified as a hate crime by the FBI because the system they use for this is deeply flawed. So at this moment, when we have members of the public raising questions about, whether the president rhetorically is doing enough to confront and denounce white supremacy, there are also questions emerging about whether his DOJ is, minimizing the problem in its own rhetoric.
It's remarkable what you just mentioned about Heather Heyer's death and the classification of that, the circumstances surrounding her death, Hunter. As you know, covering the White House, President Trump has come under political fire for failing to denounce white supremacy in the past. He did do so after the El Paso attack, reading from a teleprompter. A lot of people did not believe that he was actually denouncing it. They felt that this was a speech written for the press, essentially, so that the headlines would then suggest that the president had denounced it. You've covered the White House. How did you take the president's statement in the wake of El Paso and the subsequent visits to El Paso and Dayton on the ground there reporting directly with the White House press corps?
He very much did and said the right and normal things in the aftermath of that attack and in the aftermath of that pressure. But again, the 2-year anniversary of Charlottesville means this is about, a couple days off from the 2-year anniversary of that press conference I was at in Trump Tower, where, he referred to some of the white nationalists who were involved in the violence there as, quote unquote, very fine people. And I asked the president, why do you think these people support you? And he just ignored that question and said they don't, even as I showed him a photo of, one very prominent neo-Nazi in a Make America Great Again hat. So, President Trump may start to switch his rhetoric now. He certainly seemed to after El Paso. But, there's been a lot of analysis of what his campaign has been putting out, including in the days surrounding this shooting. And this rhetoric that immigrants are invading, this language that really mirrors what we saw in the shooter's manifesto, has all been espoused by the president. So he can denounce it, but it's one thing when you say these immigrants are invading, some of them are criminals and rapists, and then you say I denounce racism. It's kind of a having your cake and eating it too, if you will, where on the one hand he's saying things that could fuel this anger, and on the other hand he's saying he's against it.
Hunter Walker, thank you so much. Always appreciate your reporting.
Thanks for having me, guys.